Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. A little bit of news on top of the Northwestern game last night. I am your lead analyst and host, Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by publisher Adam Jacoby and managing editor Ross Binder. Before we get started, before we share that further news with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that rate and review. On YouTube, drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking. Post Northwestern victory, 40-14 there in Kinnick Stadium. So you heard that right. I'm now your lead analyst at Hawkeye Beacon. Not a huge role change, just a bit of a change in terms of title and the things that I'm doing. It just kind of encapsulates that at Hawkeye Beacon, and I'm grateful for the opportunity and the recognition of the hard work that's been put in. So, Adam, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, actually, you've been mispronouncing that. It's actually lead analyst. We're going into metallurgy, and so it is actually a pretty substantial role change. We're getting into mining. No. That's a lie, a joke. Lead analyst, yeah, we talked about it for the last few weeks, and the work that Eliot's been doing, frankly, a title like recruiting analyst just does not cover it. And anyone that's been reading the site knows that is the case and has been the case for quite a while. We have been over the moon about Eliot's coverage on football, men's basketball, recruiting, podcast production, everything in between. And so when you look at the totality of the work that Eliot's been doing for the site, for Hawkeye Beacon, a title like recruiting analyst just paints a very incomplete story. Really only paints one corner of that picture. And so we're happy to have a new title for Eliot, one that actually paints a more complete picture. And we are excited to have Eliot along with the ride for the foreseeable future, Lord willing, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, we wanted to make sure that title was at the very least taken care of first and foremost. And hopefully we've got some more good news to share on that front as the days, weeks, and months go by.
Yeah, we will keep you all posted. And let's stop talking about me. Let's talk a little bit about football. Iowa beats Northwestern 40-14 yesterday evening, afternoon in Kinnick Stadium, and let the Brendan Sullivan era begin. There is a clear difference between this Iowa offense with Brendan Sullivan under the helm and, getting a few reps. Of course, there's a few 3 and outs. He had to get into the groove of things. But the Iowa offense, once he did get into a groove, just opened up so much. I don't want to say it looks like a completely different offense, but after the way the offense looked with Cade to start, I mean, he had those completions, right? The 42-yard completion, they still weren't great throws. So just a clear difference between these two offenses based on who's under center. Ross, you were watching on TV with clearly a different angle than Adam and I. Pretty clear to you too, I take it.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, once you got through those first couple early drives where there was some stickiness and things just weren't completely clicking, but by that drive before before halftime and then into the third quarter, that's really when the offense finally started to move and started to click. And watching it just felt like the offense just actually has room to breathe. Like it can actually just move better. Like with Cade, a lot of times it felt like the offense was just kind of in a box, or it was just kind of everything needed to go just precisely right in order for anything to work. And that made things very difficult to operate when things inevitably weren't perfect in some way. And with Sullivan, it just felt like there's a little more space, there's a little more room, and it just makes things easier on everybody. I know a lot of the other guys on the offense just remarked that having Sullivan back there, gives the defense something else that they really have to key on, which is his mobility, and that, opens things up more for Caleb, and it opens things up more, for the offensive line and for the receivers. So it adds a lot more freedom to the offense than what we had seen under Cade. And I think that manifested itself very clearly in the third quarter when the offense was just really humming at that point. Adam, what did you see?
It's funny that you mentioned room to breathe for the offense, because there was a point in the first quarter where Cade McNamara was still on the field, and they run Lachey in motion to the sort of the short side boundary. He runs a 3-yard out. McNamara puts it right on his hands. It's a catch, makes a catch right before the sidelines, and it's a gain of 3. And that is a perfectly timed, like, 3-yard out route that had no real chance to be more productive than that. Like, that was the small little window that they had to operate in to get 3 yards. And that is sort of limiting the effectiveness of the offense just structurally, straight off the bat. And yeah, once Northwestern had to account for the mobility that Sullivan brought in, and to that end, once Iowa stopped running Cade McNamara plays for Brendan Sullivan, which sort of typified the first 3 drives, and that's something that even Hawkeye Game Film said on Twitter. And that guy knows football left, right, up, and down. He's one of my favorite follows on Twitter, full stop. Once Iowa stopped trying to run this short pass, get what we can, hopefully grind out 10 yards, and actually incorporated Sullivan's mobility into the offense, the Northwestern defense didn't really have anybody to key on. And you saw that in that last drive of the first half when Sullivan was able to get outside of contained, turn, good coverage into a 5-yard scramble, a 6-yard scramble. Once that offense started to get unstuck, once Northwestern had to account for the mobility, and Brendan Sullivan is actually gaining positive yards with his feet, moving the ball downfield, that when I was inside the Northwestern 30 and they can actually use Caleb Johnson in that big play power rushing game, all of a sudden he breaks free, does the twirly whirly, and the stiff arm. Iowa gets the lead, never gives it back. And you could tell right from there that they had figured out how to move the ball with Brendan Sullivan, how to make Northwestern's defense get right back on its heels, which is the first time we've seen a defense on its heels in between the 20s, essentially, pretty much all season, except for, Illinois State and Troy. And things just looked remarkably different. Eliot, you were sitting right there next to me in the press box. It was a palpable change in the way that Iowa's offense was operating, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very, very clearly moves from immobile quarterback to mobile quarterback, and that's how Leicester started calling the plays, and allowing Sullivan to operate. What I will say is I think that Leicester and Kirk clearly wanted to give Cade the opportunity to stretch out the defense, because they did on that 42-yard bomb. That should have been a touchdown. There's a pass to Gill on the left sideline where he could have caught it and run, but Cade threw it to where he had to go out of bounds. There's that fade, go up and get it ball to Luke that was not accurate. There was another throw to Seth Anderson that probably should have been a touchdown where
he was open.
He threw it too far to the sideline. And then Cade, you mentioned the 3-yard out. That's all it was. One thing that you and I have talked about, and we've talked about on this podcast pretty continually, is Cade's footwork. On that interception, that was a pick 6. That was the nail in the coffin, right? Like, done deal, going to Sullivan. Cade clearly, it's almost like he's got happy feet. I'll start with that. Happy feet in the pocket. And you can't have happy feet at the Big Ten level and expect to throw a ball accurately. And that's what was happening. He was under pressure, and then it was Luke's right there. And I can't remember the kid's name that made the pick 6 for Northwestern, but do you got it, Ross?
I think it was
Johnson, right?
Theron Johnson.
Theron Johnson. I knew it was a unique name. Theron Johnson snags it and runs it for the touchdown. And it was just like it was a scared, get rid of the ball, And I don't know if Cade made that noise, but it was
Presumably not.
right. It was they're bearing down on me. There's Luke, and you can't play quarterback like that at the Big Ten level. And of course, like we've said, Sullivan came out, the offense struggled. It was like Tim was running the offense for Cade, and I don't know if it was like scripted or if that was under Kirk's, hey, we need to still be conservative because the defense is running well or playing well or what. But you started seeing bootlegs. You started seeing, one thing Mason said to us in terms of the dynamic of how things changed is he told Jennings Dunkers, just keep blocking, because Brendan's going to run around. And it's amazing how much Northwestern had to account for that in the passing game and in the running game. And Caleb said, it spread things out. There were only 6 guys in the box when he had that big, long touchdown run in the first half. Caleb made it clear that though he might not have said it, it made things easier when Sullivan was out there, right? He may not have said it verbatim, but that's the way it was. And then he kind of stepped back and said, I'm confident with whoever's at quarterback. Well, we have eyes, Caleb. Things were abundantly different. His mobility, and this is what we've been saying for weeks. You don't only have to account for a quarterback's mobility inside the 10-yard line. You have to account for it for the other 80 yards, 90 yards of the football field too. And that's where things opened up for the offense in the run game and in the throwing game. And like to boot, looking at stats here, Brendan he didn't set the world on fire. I included this in my post-game article too. He was 9 of 14 for 79 yards through the air. And then on the ground, he was the second leading rusher, believe it or not. 8 carries for 41 yards and a touchdown. Like that's not crazy numbers, but it's good enough. And he affects the game in other ways. And Caleb Johnson didn't even have an outlandish game other than the 3 touchdowns, right? He had 109 yards other than 3 touchdowns, right? It just opened things up so drastically that it looked like a different offense.
The big thing with Brendan Sullivan is that, Ross, I'll get to you in just a second here, but the big thing with Brendan Sullivan is that he was able to make drives continue. You talked about him being the second leading rusher, and that was it 8 or 9? It was 8 rushes for 41 yards, which is 5 yards a pop. His longest rush was 9 yards, and it was on a scramble, right? And so that is just decent chunk of yardage, decent chunk of yardage, decent chunk of yardage. And using that mobility, there were multiple times where he was just dancing around back in that backfield, and Northwestern's defenders just could not get a hand on him. And so what it ended up turning into is a lot like when Iowa was playing Aiden Childs in the last game, where at some point you just ask your defenders to keep contain on this guy rather than trying to take him down. Well, okay, if all of a sudden you can't pin your ears back and try to put a square hit on a guy, like Cade McNamara took once or twice during that game, all of a sudden it turns into a game of contain and cat and mouse. And while everybody's sort of waiting to see what the most athletic guy in the field does next, what else is happening? Guys are still running open. Secondary members are still trying to have to do their job. Offensive linemen are still blocking. And all Sullivan has to do is just find one little lane, even if it's to the sideline, even if it's just to get 5 yards. That's still 5 yards better than an incompletion. That's a dynamic that Cade McNamara did not bring to the offense. And that is how what would be a 2nd and 17, or God forbid, a strip sack and fumble. That is how that turns into a 2nd and 5, 2nd and 3 instead. Ross, I cut you off. What else did you have to add?
I mean, you hit it. That was the thing I was going to bring up, was just that scrambling in the pocket that really stood out to me as much or more than even some of his runs where he, gained positive yardage. There was one play that really stood out to me where he ran around so much in the backfield and covered almost sideline to sideline. And, he had to have it for five or 6 seconds, it felt like. And then he finally ended up just throwing the ball away because he was, there's going to be a lost yardage. But it was like, that's a play that Cade McNamara could not have made. Like if that happens, Cade is sacked for 6-7 yard loss, about 3 or 4 seconds sooner in that play. And I was looking at, second and long or whatever, and the defense is fired up, and now you've got it's still 2nd and 10, I think, but the defense has just been running around for 6-7 seconds, so they're a little more tired. You feel better about you're not so far behind the chains and everything. So there's just so many little things that he adds beyond the obvious, like, oh, he can take it off and run with it on a zone read. He can take it, he can call his own number on a draw or whatever. And there's so much other things that he's able to add to that offense with his running ability and his mobility that it just makes things a lot easier.
I was just going to say Oh, go ahead, Adam.
One more thing to add in terms of how he opens up the offense. Caleb Johnson was not having a good day rushing the ball with Cade McNamara at quarterback. In fact, he broke 100 yards. He got 3 touchdowns. The last 66 yards came on his last 2 rushes, both touchdowns, when Iowa was really breaking the game open. The Northwestern defense had to account for Brendan Sullivan as well as Caleb Johnson. That is very difficult to do. And if Brendan Sullivan does not come into the game, there is almost no chance that we're talking about Caleb Johnson breaking 100 yards, getting his, 3 touchdowns and getting up to, what is it, 16 touchdowns on the year, 17? I mean, it changes the way defenses have to play Iowa when there's 2 different guys who are dangerous in the backfield. It just changes the whole dynamic of that offense.
I was going to add to what you said, Ross. I mean, sure, 8 carries for 41 yards, but he probably traversed 41 yards back and forth on that one play and extended it 6 or 7 seconds, like you mentioned. And you said this too, is that's a sack or an interception, or maybe Cade gets rid of it. Like maybe give him the benefit of the doubt there, but I just don't see a scenario where he's anywhere near able to extend a play like that. The only time we've remotely seen that was against Illinois State in that pass to Zach Ortworth. But there's a huge freaking difference between doing that against Illinois State and Michigan State and Iowa State and all these other programs that Iowa faces. But Sullivan's command of the offense was clear. When they had that they had several 4th and 1s or 4th and 2s where in the first half, I mean, what are you doing? Go for it, in my opinion. And there was one where Sullivan looked to the sideline and you could see he was emotional. He's like, let's go. And I like to see that too. And I don't know that we've seen much of that from Cade, that fiery on-field stuff. I have seen, I remember against Washington, some beef was going on and Cade ran down and got in the guy's face, which I love seeing that type of stuff. But nonetheless, defenses get gassed on plays like that. And even if it's not a completion, they're having to account for all these other things. And if you stack up plays like that, man, something's going to break. You're going to find Seth Anderson. You're going to find Caden Weegan. And if you get the ball to Caden Weegan in a situation like that where all these other guys are gassed, that's probably going to be a touchdown, right? We saw it yesterday with the punt. You haven't even talked about Caden Weegan's punt return. Iowa scored on 4 consecutive offensive drives, and in the middle of that was Caden Weegan's punt return. And it looked like he was so close to tipping out of bounds, and he very well might have. There were some angles where you just couldn't tell, but we got to give our flowers to Caden Weegan too. Finally breaking one. We've been saying it all season. He just needs one, right? He just needs a crease, and he made it happen. And it wasn't like this side of the field's open, I'm going. He broke tackles. He just was a man determined to get to the end zone. And I think it's important that we recognize how the team reacted on the sideline and just how everybody was happy for him. Walk on, former Iowa Western guy, who did have some success there, clearly had some FCS offers, UMass offer, decided to walk on at Iowa, had to wait behind Cooper DeJean, and now here he is. And I've written about him a little bit this season. I don't know that I will again just because I've already done it, but he did finally do it. He finally broke through. He finally scored that touchdown. And the weight that takes off of an offense that's already moving is, I mean, that's how you reach 40-14, right? It makes the game easy for the offense.
Yeah, you talk about him having to wait his turn, and there's not every football player wants to do that, especially once they get into an environment like Iowa, Kinnick Stadium, et cetera, et cetera. But just like Jay Higgins, Caden Weegan not only waited his turn, but had an all-time great player to learn from, and a really good position coach to learn from too, right? If you're going to be on the bench, you might as well be on the bench watching Cooper DeJean return punts. You might as well be in the same special teams room that LeVar Woods is running, right? Like that is a perfect opportunity to grow without being on the field to grow. And so, yeah, Weegan has taken tremendous steps forward as a return specialist, but they are not unexpected steps forward because he is in an environment to develop as a returner. And we know that success is not only possible, but sort of the standard at Iowa in that special teams room. So, yeah, credit to Weegan for taking advantage of this opportunity because, it's more than just learning by osmosis. You have to do the work, and he's clearly been doing the work. And he is a substantially better returner than he was last year. Absolutely a better returner. And I think playing with DeJean, being with Woods, and learning week to week is all been part of that process for him. But really, he's just showing off gifts that he has developed in that uniform.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, that touchdown was really the one that kind of broke the game wide open, because that took it from 19-7 to 26-7. I mean, I don't think anybody felt too overly concerned at 19-7 either, because of the way the defense was playing and Northwestern was doing very little. But definitely, once Weegan hit that punt return and it goes to 26-7, it felt like, all right, it's chips and salsa time. Like this game is well under control.
I do
Yeah,
want to.
especially with the way that Northwestern was just not moving the ball. They were not going to come back from 19 down at that point.
I do want to go back to Caleb, and then you mentioned how the Northwestern was moving the ball, so we need to talk about the defense. But this is from Ben Stevens on Twitter, at Ben Scott Stevens or Big Ten Ben. If you don't follow him, you should. Ton of Big Ten content. He's really good. This is through 8 games. Caleb Johnson versus the last 2 Heisman running backs. Caleb Johnson, again, through 8 games, 146 attempts, 1,144 yards, which is 7.8 yards per carry, and 16 touchdowns. This is Derrick Henry's 2015 entire season. 180 attempts, 1,044 yards, and 14 touchdowns. Mark Ingram, 09, entire season, 153 attempts for 1,004 yards, 8 touchdowns. Like Ashton Jeanty, 159 attempts, 1,376 yards, and 18 touchdowns through 7 games. Like
yeah.
Genty's, if he's not Heisman, he should be, because the numbers he's putting up are nuts. Granted, group of 5 competition, sure, yes, I agree. But Caleb needs to be in New York at this rate. Like 5-3 or not, whatever they finish, these are astronomical numbers. He's going to pass Sean Green, right? I mean, at this rate, it's almost inevitable.
I would say touchdowns, definitely. The yardage is trending that way, but we'll see. There's still four games to go. Some difficult run defenses, but getting back to Sullivan, that's going to help him. We've talked about it already, but Sullivan opens up the running game. He opens up the offense. And maybe we should mention the other skill Sullivan has. He's a blocker.
Yeah.
He got out ahead of Pascuzzi on that little catch and run, and he was he was looking for dudes to block, and he got in a couple blocks too, as I recall. So
maybe not a good blocker, but a blocker.
yeah, he's willing. He's willing.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But no,
That's, go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead, Adam.
I was just
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's him coming up under Cade McNamara, because McNamara threw that lead block on that touchdown at Minnesota for Caleb Johnson. So clearly, this is a QB skill at Iowa. Everyone learns how to block. Everybody.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about the defense. 0 offensive touchdowns. You mentioned all the greatness of the special teams. They allowed a touchdown to a third-string walk-on punt returner who was wearing number 48. So it was late in the game. Didn't matter, but at the same time, it matters, I'm sure, to LeVar Woods. I'm sure he was not happy on the sideline. Now, so 0 offensive touchdowns, of course, Theron Johnson with the pick 6. But other than the first drive, Northwestern's offense did absolutely nothing. We were sitting up in the press box like, here we go again. And then, nope. Northwestern's offense moved down the field. They missed that field goal, and then they couldn't do diddly squat. Quinn Schulte had a pick, and then Cade threw the pick 6. But Quinn Schulte had a pick. Jay Higgins had a pick. 2 sacks, 7 tackles for loss. Probably more sacks and more tackles for loss if Lausch isn't that mobile. Because he's one of the more mobile guys probably in the Big Ten under center. The defense just ate them alive, especially in the run game where Northwestern is actually not bad. Looking at Cam Porter, 13 carries for 50 yards, average of 3.8 yards per carry. Other than that, Joseph Hyman, 5 carries, 7 yards. Jake Arthur's 1 carry, 1 yard. And then it's quarterbacks, other than AJ Henning. They tried that trickery play in the first drive. AJ Henning it was a pitch. And it was 1 carry for -7 yards. So, and then you look at the passing offense, and Jake Lausch finished 10 of 19 for 62 yards and a pick, and was again sacked twice. Like, the defense just ate these dudes alive, and it was a group effort too. We were talking about this before we hopped on, Adam. Jay Higgins led the effort defensively with just 8 tackles. That's the most on the team. And that was Nick Jackson with 6, and then Castro Herkett and Deshaun Lee with 4. It was just, and they weren't on the field that often. And again, here we go, talking about Brendan Sullivan running. And what else that does as a running quarterback when you're able to take off and you stay in bounds, it's more time off the clock, right? And they were just eating up clock on the offensive side of the ball. What did it do? It helps out the defense. And this is what we were looking for, right? Going into this week, they got it was just drive after drive against Michigan State. And we were thinking, here's a revenge game, here's a bounce back game. So I really think they put that out there.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you shouted out Ethan Herkett, because all you do is look at the stats and you're like, okay, 4 tackles. But that 7-yard loss by Henning on that reverse, that was all Ethan Herkett. And it takes a lot of athleticism to be able to make that play in the open field. And, some of it was because Henning had a little bit of a, stumble in trying to get to the outside. Well, he broke stride because Herkett was keeping up with him. Herkett was absolutely disrupting the arc that he wanted to take. So what looked like it should be all right, just beat the defensive end and you're going to have some green grass. Well, one does not simply beat Ethan Herkett in the open field, and for a guy whose name that we haven't really called as much as, to some extent, the second half of last season when he was making big plays after big plays, now that defenses are sort of keying on him and understand the sort of weapon that he is, even though he's getting more snaps, it makes, they are trying to take him out of the equation more than they were last year. And so for him to be able to make a play like that, yeah, absolutely sort of changes the way that, that drive was going. But ultimately, Iowa forced 7 3-and-outs. And when they're able to do that, the defense doesn't get tired, right? They start to understand that Northwestern's not really able to do their plan A's. You mentioned Cam Porter only got 3.8 yards. The Cam Porter situation is a whole lot like Caleb Brown in 2023. He hurt his leg against Washington. He's cleared to go, but clearly not 100%. And boy, you try playing running back in the Big Ten at 80%, and you're probably not going to average 4 yards a pop. Caleb Johnson didn't last year, and we're talking about him as a Heisman, like a legit Heisman candidate right now. And so, one, that was a little bit easier for Iowa. Two, yeah, they're getting Northwestern's offense off the field with ease. And I even asked Jay and Nick together at that post-game interview, which was a little bit surreal. We've got that on our front page at Hawkeye Beacon. But yeah, they just with no prompting from Iowa's media whatsoever, they decided to do their post-game interview together. And so I asked them, Childs gave you guys a bunch of difficulty as a dual threat QB last game. And so how do you go from that to really shutting down Lausch with that similar skill set? And for them, it was all about, like, one, contain, two, understand what he's going to try to do with the ball, three, a bunch of it was gap responsibility too. And one thing that they didn't mention, and I'll just go ahead and say that for him, Lausch is not as good as Aiden Childs. He is not as athletic. He is not we can't just run after this guy. Iowa's defense is not as athletic as Aiden Childs. It is as athletic as Jack Lausch. And so that is, once again, like, it's not just the skill set, it is the pure athleticism. Brendan Sullivan has it. And so defenses have to account for, not being able to tee off on him. Aiden Childs has it. Jack Lausch doesn't have it. And so Northwestern could not get Iowa's defense on its heels the way that Brendan Sullivan, the way that Aiden Childs gets defenses on their heels. Eliot, you are dying to say something.
Caitlyn Clark was at the game yesterday. And in that same vein, within the last 5 minutes, the Indiana Fever have parted ways with head coach Christie Sides.
Oh! Okay.
Adam, you're our women's basketball guy here at the site. What do you have to say about that as I get that on the board?
Fluff bomb.
We're absolutely using Clef Bomb. A little bit of a surprise the way that Indiana finished the second half of the season, because it really looked like they were starting to figure out some things. And honestly, that roster was not built for success. And I don't think that was Christie Sides' fault. And I also want to, sort of point out that there's a lot of coaches that probably would not have had the vision, the temerity, the foresight to find a rotation by the middle of the season, by the end of the season, that includes like Lexi Hull, Temi Fagbenle. These were sort of end of the bench players. And so I thought she did a better coaching job than most people did. That being said, I don't think she's the sort of basketball psycho that you need to really unlock the potential of Caitlyn Clark. And they're almost sort of a limited imagination that she showed. So I don't think she's a bad coach. I really hope she does get another job in the WNBA, whether that's as a head coach or assistant, because on some level, I remember her when she was hired, she kind of didn't want to be a head coach. So for someone who doesn't want to be a head coach, here's Caitlyn Clark. Like, that would really make you want to not be a head coach.
Here's the most high-profile head coaching position in the WNBA now. So
yeah, and your seat is like microwave hot now. You lose one game and ESPN is on your ass. For someone who was coaching in front of 4,000 fans just last season, it's like it's a little bit different now. So it'll be fascinating to see, like, if they want to go get Stephanie White, that would be a step up. But at the end of the day, I also don't think it's Sides' quote fault that Indiana was quote only a 6 seed. I think that was a success on her part as much as anything. But it does not surprise me that Indiana thinks that their long-term success is with somebody else at head coach. So Godspeed, Christie Sides. I know a lot of fans didn't like you, but I thought that you were better than most people gave you credit for. That is my take on it. Either of you guys have a take on that as well?
I don't.
Yeah, no, that's what we have you for, Adam. Yeah, I watched a little bit of the WNBA this year and Caitlyn, but I wouldn't be informed enough to have a take or an opinion. But you got to go get somebody who's a little bit psycho to coach Caitlyn Clark, right? Now, I don't think Lisa Bluter's a little bit psycho. I think she's a lot of bit psycho. Just kidding. Lisa Bluter is
same with Jan Jensen. No, like
okay.
Bluter and Jensen are basketball psychos all the way. It's like, look at the Lakers. They just hired JJ Redick to coach LeBron James. Why? Because they're both basketball psychos. At some point, if you have a savant on the court, you need a savant on the sideline too. Phil Jackson, basketball psycho. Tex Winters, basketball psycho. Like, that is the best thing a coach can be when you have an all-time great player on the floor. And so I hope Indiana gets somebody like that on the sideline, because I don't really think Christie Sides was quite that.
Okay. Now, one thing we didn't mention that I want to touch on before we get out of here that you mentioned, Adam, was, and we're going to revert back to football here. We're going to revert back to Brendan Sullivan, is the way the Northwestern guys responded to him after the game. Not only did they come over and talk to him, they were dapping him up. A lot of them were really excited to see him, gave him some big hugs. But Brennan was talking shit for a good contingent of the game, and they were still going over and giving him high fives. And maybe he was talking to some of the dudes that he wasn't giving high fives or hugs to. Who knows? Like, maybe they were talking before he went out there. We just don't know. But that also, Pat Fitzgerald was there. If you haven't seen that, that's all over social. I put it up, put photos and a video of Sully up talking to him. Fitz was walking on the field with his son Ryan, and if you didn't know that, Ryan is a 2025 commit at quarterback for Iowa. He'll be a walk-on, but a really good get for Tim Lester. He chose Iowa over a ton of FCS offers and Group of 5 offers. And his other son, Brendan Fitzgerald, who Louis Vaquer from Wildcat Report told us that Brendan is supposed to be the better one of the Fitzgerald sons. So he was on campus at Iowa visiting this weekend as well. So that in mind, anyway, Sully ran over to the tunnel after the game and talked to Fitz and Ryan and Fitz's wife. And it was a really cool moment. They got to just hug there and enjoy the moment together. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add on that, but what I will say regarding Fitz being there, I can't tell you how many responses and stuff I saw on our on Twitter to my tweets about Fitz being there. Next head coach, we should bring him on staff. That's not going to happen, guys. Still,
no.
Too much baggage there. And like, he might be, I mean, he is a good quality coach, right? Like, as far as understanding the game, doing a lot with a little. They're not going to do that after Northwestern just fired him 2 years ago. 2 years ago. After all that
and especially with and especially with Iowa still sort of licking its wounds after that settlement. And I don't want to open a can of worms, because there's a lot of people with a lot of really strong feelings about how all that shook out, and I'm not going to sort of relitigate any of this or that. But we are talking about Pat Fitzgerald, a guy with 110 wins as a head coach. Obviously, he knows how to coach. We're talking about, like, obviously he's got great coaching skills, knows the game of football back and forth, and he's somebody that Kirk Ferentz has been consistent with having a lot of respect for. But the environment is not great at Iowa, and it's also, like you said, a little bit too soon, after that whole thing. But going back to the way that Northwestern responded to Brendan Sullivan, Eliot, while you were on the field and talking and taking pictures of the recruits, we were talking with Louis and Matt from Wildcat Report, and I had mentioned that the teammates at Iowa had a lot of respect for the way that Brendan Sullivan had gone about, like being the first guy in the room, being the last guy to leave, and doing that consistently. And this was before the game, right? This was before anybody knew how the QB situation was going to shake out on Saturday. And one thing that they said was, even when he was at Northwestern, Brendan had people gravitated toward him. His leadership was never in question. His commitment to the process was never in question. And, probably some of that is being the son of a D1, Big Ten. His dad was a lineman at Michigan, right? So he knows the sacrifices that a football player needs to make, and he knows what especially that entails for a quarterback. And so for him to be, chirping on the sidelines after some big plays, making that touchdown to the point where Mason Richmond has to, sort of pull him back and say, hey, you can celebrate with us too, as he mentioned after the game. But even with that, for them to, after the game, and like while I was walking on the field, I see Sullivan talking with some folks on the sideline. And as I'm taking video of it, there are Northwestern players lining up next to me, waiting for their turn, politely, happily. And when they're interacting with him, it's not just a handshake, hey, good to see you, blah, blah, blah. These are old friends greeting each other. These are, I think he and Cam Porter, shared a little prayer together. And I think there are some other players that, they were clearly sharing a spiritual moment with each other. And we know that Brendan is a very religious, very spiritual person too. And so you can tell that all that yapping was never crossing a line. It was never personal. It was never something that, it was probably along the same lines of the yapping that they did in practice, because spoiler alert to anyone who thinks that sportsmanship is sacred in football, and especially among teammates. Oh, there's yapping at practice all the time. There's trash talk at practice all the time. And so the fact that there was still that, that teammate or camaraderie is the word I'm looking for after the game, that tells me that there's never any line being crossed. And that was just competitors competing it. And Sullivan saying, hey, buddy, here I am. Yeah, like, you gave Roush a job over me. Here's what you're missing. And I think everybody on that Northwestern sideline knew, or at the very least, all the former players, former coaches, former staff members who came up and greeted him. They all, understood that what Sullivan had done was, just competitors competing. And it was also kind of congratulatory too. It wasn't just, hey, good job in relief of the injured QB. It was you just earned it. You just earned QB1, right? That there was that, like, man, I'm really proud of you for doing that. And it wasn't the daps that you give somebody who's going to go back to the second string in the depth chart on Monday. It just wasn't.
Well, we will definitely see about that. That's going to be something everybody's watching for on Monday when that depth chart comes out for the game versus Wisconsin. Last thing, I swear, regarding this podcast, I just saw this tweet from John Miller. Rhys Dakin has attempted 42 punts on his young Iowa career. Tory Taylor attempted 40 punts in his freshman season, the COVID-shortened 2020. How do their stats compare? Tory Taylor, 40 punts, 44.1 average, 18 inside the 20, 9 punts of 50-plus yards. Rhys Dakin, 42 punts, 44.8 average, 20 inside the 20, and 11 punts of 50-plus yards. Yo.
I mean, like, everyone knows that who's watched Dakin this year. Like, he's gonna be a really good punter. He's already, as a true freshman, he's already really good. So, you just think what he can do for another few years. It's impressive, really impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. We requested him for interviews on Tuesday. Hope we get him, because he's a delight to talk to as well. But yeah, he is a weapon from day one. And to go from Tory Taylor to Rhys Dakin, both wearing that number 9, this is going to be, I mean, there are a whole lot worse things you can have than an Aussie who's booming punts for you and putting Northwestern, inside its own, what was it, 6-yard line on 4 or 5 consecutive possessions. That's complimentary football, guys. but you but you have to be able to, like, hold up your end of the bargain for it to be complimentary, I suppose. And Dakin doing that from the get-go is such a weapon for this team.
We will wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode of HawkCast, brought to you by Iowa.rivals.com. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that today at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. We'd love to have you there. We're going to be getting intel later today on this Sunday regarding how things went for the football team, what's it looking like as far as depth chart going forward, and more. Of course, we've got future casts on the table that we'd love to share with you. Join us there, iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Couple recruits that should be committing relatively soon, both on the men's basketball and football side. So you can get all that intel there with us at Hawkeye Beacon. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button while you're here on YouTube. Drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking about that victory over Northwestern. And on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, hit that subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and hit that rate and review. Helps us out a lot, helps push the podcast, get other people talking about the Hawkeyes, and engaging with you and us here on HawkCast. For now, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby. We will see you next time.